I want to start today's episode with a bit of a clarification. I went back and forth on whether I was even going to do this review or not, and I want to talk about the why behind that before I get too deep into the weeds here. For starters, I started doing this channel with reviews of the mainline Monster Rancher titles, and I've always made it a point to dedicate some portion of the merry month of Mons games to Monster Rancher and my relationship with it. I feel the reviews still stand, even if my delivery back then is quite different than it is now. Seriously, dear past Snek, why did you put huge, unnecessary pauses between paragraphs? That said, I was afraid I wouldn't have anything new or profound to say about the re-releases of some of my favorite games. So for the sake of this review, I'm going to focus mostly on how the games are different or improved upon. And lastly, also, I was afraid of saturating the channel for those who aren't here for the Monster Rancher stuff. So in order to state my own concerns, would you guys kindly pause this video during this little intro sequence and leave a comment down below letting me know if these concerns are founded on any kind of solid ground or what? I'd be very curious to hear the general consensus on the subject. Anyway, without delaying any further, let's take a closer look at today's game, Monster Rancher 1 and 2 DX. Greetings everyone, this is the Hipster Snek. Today, I'm finally diving into the December 2021 re-release bundle of the first two games of my favorite game franchise, Monster Rancher 1 and 2 DX. To consolidate the journey required to get us here, the simple take is that these games are based on the PlayStation 1's Monster Rancher and Monster Rancher 2, originally launched in 1997 and 1999 respectively. And for clarification, Monster Rancher the First never got a PAL release. The game released there, simply titled Monster Rancher, was in fact the sequel game, Monster Rancher 2. In the years leading up to this particular port, Japan got exclusive relaunches on mobile platforms and Nintendo Switch, leaving international fans rather curious as to where we stood. Eventually, we did get a trailer announcing that they would be bundled together and launched internationally, including a PC port, in no small part courtesy of the social media presence and persistence of international ranchers making their voices heard. Thus, in December of last year, we finally received these games anew on iOS, Steam, and Nintendo Switch. To clarify, my review will be exclusively based on my personal experiences with the PC port of the game. Very special thanks to Deadly Cat Queen for the early Christmas present at that. Although the interfaces, changes, and overall gameplay experience are essentially identical between each, including clicking in lieu of touch functionality remaining intact even in the PC port. More on that in a moment. The Steam version starts via a launcher, where the player is prompted to pick which of the two games they'll play, and the gameplay actually begins after selection, as do things like individual options and settings for each game. Special thanks to my buddy Gym Leader Ed discovering that so I didn't have to. Regardless of choice, the story is very much the same between both games. We begin the tales as brand new ranchers with our respective monster breeding associations and get introduced to one of two young women, Holly in the first and Coltia in the second game, whereupon our careers as ranchers begin in earnest. Our ambition is to climb into the world of raising monsters and all that entails, the relaxed pace of life on the ranch as we raise the monster stats, the thrill of the monster battles to the exotic locales we'll visit along the way as we go daring expedition treks all over the world. What you do in this open-ended game is entirely on you, and it will all begin in the same place, the town hub menu, chiefly those of the market and the shrine. The means by which you receive a monster is very similar to how the original games handled it, with the markets offering set rosters of monsters available to you with basic default stat loadouts, but the shrine holding the world of intrigue. But instead of setting a disk in it for it to read, use a simple search interface to check against a database of CDs, both music and PS1 games alike, in order to generate your monster. And if you're feeling particularly indecisive, there's now a random option which will plunk one out of the enormous catalog on your behalf and put it in place. Gone are the load times of yesteryear, as the process is now lightning fast, with virtually no downtime between picking out a disc and seeing the magic of the monster being generated from the data coming to life before your very eyes. This process is still as addictive and rewarding as it was back when I was in middle school, using my CD collection, in addition to those belonging to my parents, my sister, and my friends. And while nostalgia is certainly a factor, the mystique of the shrine remains in place, a fixture of the franchise, and still immensely entertaining of a time sink to this very day. Once you have a monster, you'll take it to your ranch where you get to raise its 6 stats: life, power, intelligence, speed, defense, and skill. Each training or resting session takes 1 in-game turn, measured in weeks, and a year is broken down into 12 months, each comprised of 4 turns. Train your monster? That's a week. Let it rest? Also a week. Fight in a tournament? That one's a week too. But some things, like the heavy training named Errantry, or expeditions, take a full 4-week block, but those tend to be the exceptions. Interesting enough, courtesy of the menu-based gameplay outside of battles, the touch and mouse interfaces actually work really well in these games. The menus are always a little chunky to begin with, so the small increase in size really isn't distracting from the GUI real estate anyway. While the controller is fully implemented, it's actually mapped to the defaults of a Nintendo Switch controller and not the original PS1 input, which is a minor technical complaint, but me and my hours upon hours of finely honed muscle memory was quite shocked when I learned that cancel was the bottom face button and not the top one. Actually, this leads to one of my legitimate grievances with the game, and while it's minor, it's too annoying to not mention. The buttons are not customizable, and worse yet, they're not labeled. Because the original games are rendered in the old 4:3 aspect ratio, the game themselves had to accommodate a widescreen 16:9 instead, so the negative space is filled with a mobile interface even in the PC version. And while I don't mind that GUI overhaul, I do mind that the button config is not explained in any of this, and thus I had to learn it via trial and error, something I preferred not to do while I was already in the heat of a monster battle, but had to do anyway. Speaking of battles, your ambition is to clear the official tournaments, each with a letter grade starting with E, the lowest, and working your way up the chain sequentially to A and eventually the highest, which is S. Or special, I assume, I don't know. Only then you experience all the various trials, specials, expeditions, and more awaiting you. And even then, your experience finding new content and breeds of monsters to unlock doesn't end just because you've broken into the Hall of Fame. Raise lots of monsters and explore the world thoroughly to find everything there is to discover. Because the pivotal factor here is the fact that you only raise one monster at a time and focus all your love and attention on that one. And it does have a limited lifespan and, more importantly, can die if it gets too old or if you're careless. All this and more adds to a compelling gameplay loop that has kept me captivated for almost 25 years now. In addition to new gameplay options and a tweaked interface, the games have some other new features. Chiefly among them is remastered music and the option to swap between the original and the new. Though that largely appears limited to Monster Rancher 2, as no such option seems to appear in the first. Other interesting options include easy access muting of the game audio and a fast-forward functionality, essentially a speed-up toggle that makes all aspects of the game, excepting the music, much faster. I don't recommend this for monster battles, as each is only 60 seconds in length to begin with, and I don't trust the AI to guide my monsters for anything. But it does make regular week-to-week training and Errantry animations a bit more tolerable. There's also a lot of bug fixes behind the scenes, new breeds of monsters added to both games, and the strange Pocket Station minigame that we missed out on the West up until now has been added back to the game data in Monster Rancher 2. Also, to clarify that last bit, I mean additional types of subbreeds of monsters that were already in the game. They didn't do anything like add entirely new breeds that weren't in the game before, so no retro polys for later franchise species or anything like that. Though, admittedly, I'd pay real-world money to see that in motion. Another odd gripe I must issue is that for all these new functions, some old conveniences ended up being strangely missing, chiefly the skip function of Monster Rancher 2, which immediately bypassed training animations and would frankly be faster than the fast-forward function in practice. Oddly enough, the ability to skip training animations on Errantries in 2 was still present, but the button prompt for it isn't on screen. What a weird quality of life choice to make. Boiled down, the games on the whole are faithful port forwards with some new goodies added on from the PS1 originals. The graphics are essentially the same, including this weird thing in MR2 where some breeds of Suezos you could actually see the top row of teeth through their upper lips. That always bugged me. But the core gameplay is unaltered, excepting the things I've already listed, and the script is essentially the same English script used in those games in the first place with a couple of minor tweaks here or there. English, CDs, warts and all. And here we come to the discussion I mentioned back in the cold opening. This is not a remaster or a reimagining or a reboot. These are those games that were polished a tad and launched on new hardware. And don't get me wrong, I'm thankful for that. Availability of the games I love and the new CD library system makes the games widely accessible to people who might have shied away from them before now. But they're still fundamentally the same games I reviewed back when the hipster Snek was just getting off the ground almost 3 years ago now. If you liked the games back then, you'll continue to like them now, maybe even more so. And if you didn't like monster games or open-ended games or mechanically nuanced life simulator games, these aren't the ones that are going to make you change your mind on the subject matter. But if you're in a third, undecided category and want to know, this bundle is an affordable way to pick up and find out. The Steam store has it listed for just $30, and those are robust titles with hours upon hours of content to explore and discover. The games are difficult to master, and they won't hold your hand, I'll say that much. I did a 4-part video series for beginner's guides to getting into the series, and even did a full Snek talk trying to explain how absolutely charming and amazing these games are. So I do feel somewhat like I've just been repeating myself for a bit of this review. So allow me one moment to break format a little and do something I haven't talked about much before. I love these games because they let me write a story. By that I mean games like Etrian Odyssey or Seventh Dragon, where I get to make my own party, or yes, Monster Rancher, where I view the action through the eyes of the rancher, a newcomer, an outsider, looking in on this strange and wonderful world, where I raise monsters who have so much personality and charm to them. And then I raise others and see how they differ or how they're the same. Let me share an anecdote from my mini game hours. This one's fairly recent. I raised a worm/hare. I named it Creamhorn. Its actually species name is Corone, which is a word that means a very similar confection, so yeah, I'm not weird, I swear. Anyway, this worm was such a sassy creature. Anytime, and I do mean any time, it had any fatigue above 0, even the smallest amount, it would beg me to let it rest instead of training. Even after I scolded it for such behavior repeatedly, it kept doing this, and would frequently skip its training and just laze around. When I cracked down on it using items like Sting Dust, which raises loyalty, and the Mystic Snake, a rather macabre item near as I'm concerned that will raise discipline, it continued this pattern. It would even run away from home, be missing for a singular week, and then return, claiming to be utterly exhausted. It did this no less than 8 times over the course of its lifespan. I swear it would just run away from home, get as far as my next door neighbor's lawn or something, and just decide to stop. Which wouldn't even surprise me given what a lazy sack of potatoes it was in practice. But try as I might, I tried to raise it patiently and lovingly, even though I was early in my playtime and thus didn't have the money for complex, never-tired ranching methods. Completely by accident, I tripped the sequence of events required for the worm to cocoon, which makes it transform into one of a small number of possible monsters with a worm subtype. So my HP/power worm transformed into a speed intelligence pixie, completely invalidating her namesake along the way. I actually posted a screenshot of this on my Twitter, and no, the transformation did not fix her attitude. It merely left me with a chubby butterfly whose name no longer made any sense. And that story will stick with me long after I turn the game off. And the individual stories people who allow themselves to get drawn into the experience will craft will be utterly irreplaceable. If you want to see some examples of that, a good one that springs to mind is some of the VTubers who played the game in its Japanese launch. I recommend Corone's stream of Monster Farm 2 and her very emotional reaction to the death of her Suezo. That and also the 4-hour-long stream that Gym Leader Ed and I did, where he got to learn firsthand just how exciting being a rancher could be. Those are the sorts of reactions of ranchers who embrace this world and all the things that can happen within it. That's why I love these games, and I cannot recommend Monster Rancher 1 and 2 DX enough. Get it today on iOS, Nintendo Switch, or Steam. Ladder's link is in the description below, as always. And this has been the Rancher Snek, re-reviewing these re-releases for your satisfaction today. If you liked today's episode, leave a like below. Also, leave a comment telling me your favorite monsters. I'd love to hear them. And for more like this, including obscure reviews, NDX, and the new YouTube home of the Tomodachi Bros Review Podcast Season 2, coming soon, you can tap the subscribe and bell icons, and it all goes a long way in helping me and the bros out. That way, you can come back each and every week for more just like this, and I will see you there.